Hello, today we're looking at the 8th house. Okay, we're going to do oopsie daisy, there's always something in the way. We're going to do a lesson on the 8th house today. So as normal, we're going to go a little bit deeper than your average keyword wheel, which we have here. So the 8th house is opposite the 2nd house, so always remember the oppositions are very important. It's an axis. There's a reason they're opposite each other. So we've covered the 2nd house. The 2nd house is concrete values. It's money, work, income, material possessions, etc., etc. The 8th house is merging intimacy. It's not just sex, actually. It's sexual intercourse and producing a child more than anything. We always hear these: inheritances, taxes, losses, death, joint ventures and partners, resources. But we rarely hear about how it's the house of deep values. And this is a really nice little chart, actually. It's a succadent house, as well as the 2nd house is. So yeah, this person here, I didn't do this, someone else did, I'm not sure who, but well done. It's the 2nd house is possess, secureness, certainties, I don't know about that, material needs. Then we have power, doubts, spiritual, sex, higher needs, and yeah, not overly 100% sure on that one. But anyway, so the 8th house. Now, the way that I see the 8th house and the 2nd house, I think, can sometimes be a bit different than other astrologers. But the 8th house has got so many different labels, but so many different basic keyword labels that it sometimes is hard to really understand what's going on with that 8th house. So signs and planets, etc., whatever's in the 8th house does suggest how we fare financially through marriage, and inheritance, and through business partners, etc. So it is how we benefit from other people and other people's help to help us. You know, it's one house away from business partners, whereas the 2nd house is one house away from ourself. So, you know, there's a reason why that's there like that. So if Jupiter was in the 8th house in your natal chart, then you could perhaps marry into money or get some sort of a windfall, get a big inheritance, and that can also happen if a progression or a transit Jupiter goes through the 8th house as well. Okay, it can rule bankruptcy and all those sorts of things to do with the disastrous side effects of money that goes along with other people. Okay, so the 8th house, though, is far more than other people's money. It tells us what is shared in every way. It's the manner in which we fuse and unite with other people. It elaborates, and as I said before, and extends upon what has happened and what's began in the 7th house. So the 8th house then is the nitty-gritty of the relationship. It's moving forward. You know, like I say, everything's fluid. So, you know, what is happening to these two people gets represented by the 8th house. I'll just pause for 1 second because I can hear something in the bush. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so the 8th house is also naturally associated with Pluto and Scorpio, which is why it's labelled the house of sex and death and regeneration and all those things. Now, this again is interesting because it's the next step on from our relationship. the house of sex and reproduction is the next step on from having a relationship. So that, it kind of makes sense. We become from an I, 7th house, it's we, and then the 8th house, it's how I and we value each other and what we do together. So everything, as I've said over and over and over again, is fluid. Okay, so relationships in the 7th house are the catalysts for change. And the 8th house cleans and regenerates through drawing to the surface any unresolved issues from previous relationships, especially bonding issues with mum or dad, because that's the first relationship, first from the 7th. The first relationship in our life is with our parents. And it's the most highly charged relationship. It's the most important one. And not surprising that our survival depends on our mother in this instance. So we're all born into this world as potential victims, unless there is caring and love and protection of someone bigger and more adept than us. If we don't have that, our chances of survival are slim. The loss of a mother's love doesn't simply mean the loss of a person close to us. It could mean abandonment and death. So what I'm getting to is that sometimes, especially within criminal astrology, through fear that perhaps, that stems from the first relationship we had, which was with mum and dad, we have this sort of primal fear. Certain people have this primal fear that our partner doesn't love us anymore, may betray us because of the primal fear that they have from their childhood. And then this person can be this type of person that is like, if you leave me, I'll die, I'll kill myself, I can't live without you. If I can't have you, nobody else can have you. Then we start seeing, this family annihilator stuff there. So we start to see how we feel as though if we don't have that special somebody, because we've the love we need from that somebody, some people have such unresolved and hidden fears with the 8th house and such tribulations with them that they need to realise that not every partner that they have is actually their mother or their father. So when we look into criminal astrology and when we look to death and irrational things like that, so in addition to irrational fears, a proportion of anger and outrage that that some people can feel and unleash on a partner or on a person that they deem to love can be backtracked, like I said, to infancy and childhood. So sometimes it's important to go back into that understanding who the inner child is. Okay, I won't go into the whole inner child thing. Okay, so we can represent the 8th house very similarly to the story of Persephone, like Persephone's abduction into the underworld, into Hades. In very intense relationships, we descend into the depths of our own being to discover our primordial instinctual inheritance, and the envy, the greed, the jealousy, the rage and passions and need for power and control, as well as destructive fantasies, may lurk beneath the most gentile of people. It's only through recognising it and accepting the beast in us that anything can be transformed. We can't change anything that we don't know is there, basically. We can't transform something we condemn. The darker side of our nature must be brought to light before we can be cleansed, regenerated, or born again. So it shows really actually how important relationships are in terms of the 8th house. Now, I mean, this doesn't cut it for serial killers and stranger abductions and things like that. But when you're thinking of it in terms of family murders, family annihilators, I've got Chris Watts in mind, actually. that's where you want to look at the 7th house going on to the 8th house, the 1st, the 7th, the 8th. How does the I, the we, and the us go together? The ruins and rubble from childhood are excavated in the 8th house. Our more problematic and deeper existential life statements are uncovered, alive and kicking by this point, especially in relationship crises, if that's where we're looking at it. But with the added maturity and wisdom that years of living bestows upon us, we can clean up some of the residual crap from the past here, which has coloured and obscured our perception on life, ourselves and other people, this 7th, 8th area. The gift of the 8th house is understanding yourself at such a deep level, a very great self-mastery and self-knowledge, and the ability to continue our journey unencumbered by unnecessary baggage. So you'll see over here we've got a chart with a whole ton of planets in the 8th house here. So to me, I don't know this chart. This is literally the only snap I have of this chart. But what I can say about it is that this person with all these planets in the 8th house would have probably a lot of lessons to learn, a lot of hang-ups and a lot of things to deal with in those areas. So just to nut it down into an easier way to understand it is the 1st house is I and the self. The 7th house is our partners and we, and the 8th house is how you value both yourself and the partner. So, as I've said, in terms of death and placements in the 8th house in terms of death, let me have a look at this chart over here. There's a whole bunch of placements there. Now, people may assume that, oh my gosh, that means I'm going to die early or something, but that is not the case. So I have to assure you of that. But death, as shown by placements in the 8th house, can be taken literally to mean the manner of the way that we could die, but it needs to be in terms of transits, progressions, events, and all the other things that I've shown you throughout my videos. If someone has Saturn in the 8th house, they may have a fear of dying. There may be a fear of what lays beyond our existence because they can't see it. It's not tangible. You know, that's that Saturn thing. It's a fear. It's very fearful. But the thing about the 8th house is throughout our life we go through many different psychological deaths as well. Our identity is derived from different relationships, again, the 7th house, different relationships we have with people, and we have multiple deaths. So that's another aspect of the 8th house, not just physical death. So, you know, basically we can say it like this. Childhood dies and adolescence is born. Adolescence passes and we die into adulthood. A birth requires a death and a death requires a birth. That's very, very, very instructive of those houses. Signs and planets in the 8th indicate the manner in which we meet such phase transitions. So every transition we have through life, we should look to the 8th house to see how to understand that. So as you'll see, the 8th house is not just about inheritance and things like that. It is a movement forward on from the 7th house. It is what you gain together as a relationship. It's even in a partnership, it's what you gain together in a partnership. It can be money and it can be inheritance. It can be all sorts of things like that. But the whole point is that it stems from the 7th house first and then goes to to the 8th house. See ya.